The world is a beautiful but challenging place to live. And let's face it, life hits hard sometimes. So if you find your hopes and dreams and mental well-being needs a boost, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to Inspire Us with your host, J. Paul Nadeau, a former hostage negotiator turned motivational speaker and acclaimed author of Take Control of Your Life. And now, here's your host, J. Paul Nadeau.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Inspire Us. We all know that children can get hurt, right? I'm talking about the kind of hurt that lasts, and that is when a child is put down, when they are told that they won't amount to anything, be it a teacher, a parent, a caregiver, whatever. If a child is put down, those negative thoughts can remain with them forever, unless they're challenged. And in fact, they can really interfere with the quality of life, so they must be challenged. My next guest suffered from this kind of mental abuse, and it did affect him well into adulthood until he took control of his life and changed things around. So it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Justin Bucci and to his remarkable story on Inspire Us. Hello, Justin, and welcome to Inspire Us.
Hey, thanks, Paul. Happy to be here. Always a pleasure hearing you and now seeing you.
Yeah, to give a little context to all our listeners out there, Justin and I met a few weeks ago on this popular application called Clubhouse. And it's a great honor to have him on. It's a great pleasure. Justin's always spoken with love and passion, and he gives love and passion. And the more I listen to your story, sir, you didn't have it easy for several years. Would you mind sharing your personal story with our listeners?
Yeah, of course. I would be happy to. First, I just want to take a breath. And I like to take a breath now before I speak because it helps me to recenter myself and be present in the moment and be present with God, the universe, whatever your conception is. And it's a way to drop from your head to your heart. So people always ask me, why do I pause and take a breath before I speak? So that is the reason why. And yeah, I'm going to take you back to my early days. So I grew up in a divorced family. Parents split when I was 2 years old, and I was thrown in the middle. I grew up with a mentally and verbally abusive stepfather who used to tell me that I would never amount to anything, that I'm a loser, I don't have a chance, be quiet, sit still, shut your mouth. And I started to believe it, I fell into depression, had suicidal tendencies. I remember hating myself at such a young age and thinking I wasn't good enough. So I always kept quiet, and I was really shy and reserved. As a kid growing up, I never really wanted to speak. I didn't think I was smart or intelligent. I remember one time I was hospitalized for suicide. I had actually planned to take my life one day because I just couldn't handle the pressure and the abuse. It was really overwhelming, especially at a young age as a kid. Like, you just really don't have any tools and you don't know how to process all this stuff, and you think that there's something wrong with you. But, something inside of me, said to me, just hold on. And so I did. And then as I got older, I was very negative and never really applied or tried in school because I thought I was dumb. Because of all the things that I was being told when I was a kid and growing up. So naturally, I gravitated towards drugs and alcohol to find a way to escape these feelings and thoughts and suppress them. And I fell in with the wrong crowd. I ended up going to jail and getting arrested with a felony. On top of that, I decided against going to college because I really didn't have the confidence or belief in myself. I always thought something was wrong with me. So here I am with a felony, no college education, no belief or confidence in myself. So I went to go live with my mom to try to escape the trouble and get ahead from getting arrested. At the time I was living in New Jersey. My mom lived in New York. So I decided to leave New Jersey because that's when I got my felony, and I wanted to put that crowd and that life behind me, and change the environment. So when I moved, I was living. Now the environment was changed, but the circumstances weren't changed. So now I was living with my abusive stepfather, and once again I fell into the wrong crowd, and I ended up drinking, and I would drink every weekend. And then it got to a point where I would drink every day because I just didn't care about my life. I didn't care about driving and drinking. I didn't care about dying or anything like that. I really had a disregard for life. So I would drive drunk, and I ended up one night driving drunk. And I remember I dropped the keys to my car, and as soon as I pick up the keys, I start, scratching the door to try to get the keys in. And I thought that if I could, that's a it's a tough memory, but I remember getting into the car and saying to myself, if I can just get home, everything will be okay. So I rolled down the windows for the cool, cold wind to hope to keep me awake. I blasted the music, thinking that would help. And as I was driving, I remember that I just one instance I was driving, another instance I had completely blacked out, and I smashed into a pole. I flipped upside down, and I remember the car sliding upside down. And once it finally stopped, I unbuckled my seatbelt, fell to the roof, and crawled out the broken window. And I got out and I stood outside, looked at my car upside down, and I was, at that moment, I knew something had to change, and I knew that something was different. I had only a scratch on me. If there was somebody with me in the passenger side, they would have been killed or critically injured. And I only had a scratch. I was miraculously uninjured. So I decided from that moment to cut ties with everyone I was surrounding myself with and educate myself in books about self-help and personal development. I kept reading and reading, and I hated reading in school. I never took it seriously, but this time I was serious about turning my life around. So I literally became obsessed, with self-help and motivation. I was so determined to get rid of these negative thoughts that seemed, it would never leave me. It was just always there. And I didn't believe in myself, or thought I could change. But I knew that if I just could drown out all that negativity with these books and audios, then maybe one day the noise would go away or the volume would turn down. And as I was doing that, I decided to move into a basement apartment with my brother. And this place was dirty. It was cold. It had a kitchen floor sinking in that we put a table over. So if anyone came over, we wouldn't feel embarrassed. Ants infested the kitchen. It had a bad odor. But I was happy, to be in my own privacy and away from that verbal abuse from my stepfather. And as I was reading and learning, I was working in a supermarket as a stock boy. I remember feeling sorry for myself because I thought I was smart. I started, as I was reading these books and audios, I started to think, hey, maybe I am smart. Maybe I'm capable of something, to have a better future and a better life. And at that time, I was living paycheck to paycheck. I've never taken a vacation or left the state of New York. I was making about $200 a week and eating pretty much ramen noodle every day because that's all I could afford. I really couldn't afford to eat anything, so it was always ramen noodles or pasta. And I never took a vacation. I was always living paycheck to paycheck, and it got to a point where I just cried and I begged God to help me find a way out. I spoke to my mom and I told her, and she said that her friend's son was working in Wall Street. So I put it off for about a week, and then I couldn't take it anymore. I was feeling and thinking suicidal thoughts again. It started to come up. I was getting overwhelmed. So I said to I need to do something, or I might end up hurting or killing myself. So I reached out and I called him, and he said, Justin, if you apply yourself and work hard, you can earn 75,000 a year. And to me, I was like, wow, like I've never heard that kind of money. I was making 15,000 a year at best, and I had a felony, no college education, and I had no belief in myself or confidence. But I did trust him and I did believe him. So I said, just get me an interview, please. And I remember praying to God saying, if this is where I'm supposed to go, I'll trust you. And if not, I'll trust you too. So I just let it in his hands, let him to be the one to determine the fate of my future. So I let go and let him take over. And I remember going to that office with $300 left in my bank account. I didn't have any money. I was working paycheck to paycheck, and I literally only had $300. And I was so afraid and embarrassed that they would find out about my felony. But they did, and I spoke the truth about that, and they let me in. So it didn't hold me back. They respected that I was honest, and I told the truth about that. Because my father always told me, honesty is the best policy. Like if you tell the truth, you don't have to hide, and you'll never be found out because all you're doing is telling people the truth. So I really kept that ingrained in me. Um, and I remember as I was training, I had to travel 2 hours back and forth, and it got to a point where I was running out of money. As I mentioned, I only had $300. So I was about to quit and tell them that I can't work there because I was embarrassed to ask for help. I just didn't want to ask for help. But something inside of me said, call your friend. Because I remembered I had a friend who lived in the city, and I called him, and then I ended up couch surfing at his apartment for 2 weeks. And then as I was doing that, I finally got on my first sales call, and I remember my knees were shaking, my words were fumbling because I had no experience. I was a stock boy. I had no professional experience of sales or anything like that. So on my first sales call, my knees were shaking, my words were fumbling, and I ended up closing my first deal. And first person I ever spoke to on the phone, I closed them. It was a one call close, and for me, that was the defining moment where I realized that hey, like maybe I am good at this. Maybe there's something more to me, and that gave me the validation and confidence. And I ran with that feeling, and I put my head down, and I worked my ass off. And then that's when I met my buddy Danny, Danny Skulls.
Mm-hmm.
He was an amazing person. He was my manager, and he became my mentor. And he saw something in me, and he took me under his wing, and we had an instant connection. He would host these weekly trainings on mindset and sales, and so I'd always attend them, and he really helped me a lot. And the next 3 weeks, at the end of the month, after under his mentorship and working there, I had everyone come up to me and wondering, who the hell was this new guy? People kept saying that I was lucky, it would never last, I'm not good, but I put my head down and I ignored it. And I ended the month at, I remember, 1.864 million in sales. And I became the top sales rep in the entire company. And I went on to do that for 3 years consecutively, every single month. So
Wow.
I just laughed in my head, and I would tell myself, like, luck, huh? And I remember Danny pulling me into his office and showing me my first commission check of $12,000. I made $12,000 my first month, and he knew how much I was making, where I came from. So it was a big deal for me, because I never thought in my life, I never in my life thought that was even possible, like, to be honest. But now things became possible, and I believed in myself more. So within 6 short months from working there, I ended up moving into a new apartment in New York City, leaving that basement behind. And I thought I had made it, that this is what success was about. This is what it feels like. Now I was making, I went from making 15,000 a year to 150,000 a year. Um, so, and that's a major jump. Somebody making, barely any money, 15,000 a year to 150,000 a year is a very big deal. So that's why I thought, because I was like, wow, I made it. So I was running a sales team. I was managing a sales team. And towards the end of my 3 years, I began to think that, there was more to life. So I decided to quit. I really just quit. I was like, you know what? I'm going to quit. And at that time, my friend told me about this business he wanted to start. So he convinced me to join. And a long story short is that I went through all of the money that I had saved at that company, which was $100,000. So I had lost $100,000, and I ran into credit card debt of about 30,000. So now I'm back to square one. And I went to go move to the Philippines to find myself and reset my mind, because I was just so embarrassed, and I had everything and I lost everything kind of mentality.
Mm-hmm.
felt that shame and embarrassment, and I was broken, you know. So I lived in the Philippines for a year. I went there and I traveled around, and I learned about poverty. And seeing the kids there made me think about how to appreciate life and simple things. And seeing them treat each other with such hospitality made me open my eyes. So I ended up coming back after a year with this newfound knowledge, and I learned to enjoy the simple things, to heal my relationships, to appreciate the small things, not take anything for granted. So now where I'm at is I'm living in Maui, Hawaii, and what some people would call paradise. I ended up married to a girl I once lost, but now got back together. So 4 years ago, we used to date in New York. We lived together, but during my alcohol and drug addiction, I ruined that relationship. 4 years later, at today, now we're married, and I'm sober 2 years, and I'm creating a nonprofit for children in the Philippines, which is still in the works, and I'm very passionate about helping the children in the Philippines, and I'm also providing the necessary tools for other entrepreneurs to build their confidence, gain clarity, fight imposter syndrome, and create a passion-based business and grow their business around their coaching expertise. And I'm just really here to serve and help and love others. And I appreciate being on this podcast with you, Paul, my wonderful, amazing friend, and I love you. And that's my story. So thank you.
Justin, I love you too, and you have touched on so many things. I would like to applaud you for your journey. Not the tough things, but the wonderful things that life has taught you and how you got past them. So I applaud you for where you are right now and for your attitude in life. How old were you when you first had suicidal thoughts, and how did you get over that?
That's a great question. It's hard to, it's hard to remember the age and the time, but in estimation, I will say, um, let me see, I was around, I want to say 15, maybe 14, 15 in my teens.
Yeah, and the reason I asked that question is because I was speaking recently with a friend of mine whose son is around 16 and is struggling from the same thing. So I know that that does happen. And these days, or way back when, I mean, people struggle with everything, and it's amazing that you got through. The when you took us through the car accident and how you were just scratched as a result of that accident, but that was a real eye opener for you. I thought that number one, thank God you're alive. You know, there was a reason why God spared you, and you really got into the self-help with nobody's instruction, your stepfather being the one who just kept putting you down and telling you that you were not going to amount to anything. I know what that's like. I've experienced that myself. And to find that pivot point where we just take the responsibility for our own lives onto our own shoulders and do that. And that's what you did. But you also ran into some other trouble later and found yourself in the Philippines. I think that is an incredible story to share. And thank you. Right now, what you're doing for the children, or what you will be doing for the children of the Philippines, is extraordinary. And I wish you every success with that, because yes, when we see that with our very own eyes, for me, it was in Jordan. And when you see the poverty, but the fact that they are so hospitable and so happy, and why is it that we are not here? You know, and that's a question. When I got back from Jordan, having spent a year there, I wondered why we didn't have that kind of love and appreciation. Not that we don't, but not on the scale that I saw back then. And it made me appreciate the things in life.
Yes.
With your experience, and I know that you share this on Clubhouse so much, there are a lot of our listeners out here who are struggling and perhaps in financial debt. And what would you recommend for them to do, even in a mindset type of coaching? What would you recommend for people to do if they're struggling right now?
Yeah, that's a very good question. What I will say is that, people who are struggling like I struggled with all this negativity and stuff, is that you really need to look for the silver lining in life. Like, you really need to, and what I mean by looking for the silver lining is that look for something that you can look forward to, because if you can set your sight on something and you have something to look forward to, it will bring you joy and peace. And it can be as simple as going to the movies, going on a date, going to the supermarket, going to the restaurant, going to the beach, going to vacation, going to see a friend, going to see a family member. And the reason for that is because your mind, it creates these endorphins and dopamine where you're thinking to yourself like yeah, I'm looking forward to it now, so it's like, oh, like I have something to be grateful for, to look forward to. Because oftentimes we will find ourselves depressed and anxious because we get into a place where we just think about our lives in the aspect of, I'm not where I want to be, or I have all this debt and I have all these things. And it's creating this pressure on us because it's like you have to conquer the world in one day. But, obviously Rome isn't built in one day, and neither are we. We're built over the course of our life, and we're continuing to be built and grown. So once we set that intention and focus on, what can I look forward to? What's the thing I'm aiming at? What's my target? And for me, it's always been helping other people, right? So if I can drop from my head into my heart and think to myself, like, okay, like I'll give you an example for today, for my own life, and this is happening today.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can be depressed today, or I can be happy, and you get to a place where it's a choice.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a choice which direction you want to go. And it's okay to be depressed, but it's not okay to let that hold you back and stay there. But it's okay to embrace your emotions and feelings. So if I were to be depressed today, I would say to myself, what can I look forward to? And I would say, okay, like I can look forward to going to the store and getting something that I like, or even just browsing around, or I can look forward to going for a walk, you know. It's just where our mind is going, that we want to put our attention to. I hope that's helpful, but that's kind of
Very,
simple.
very, very helpful. What you touched on, a couple of things. You touched on the fact that our attitude or our feelings are really left up to choice. It is we who tell ourselves how to feel, not anything externally. It is internally. You touched on that. What I like too is that you touched on gratitude. And I really, truly love that, because we tend to take some of the things in our lives for granted. And when we talk about being grateful, it's not only for the big things in life, and what you said about, just for today, that kind of thing. When I think, what am I grateful for? Well, in the last half hour, I'm grateful to have spent this time with my good friend, Justin. And this is a moment of gratitude for me. We have to remind ourselves. And I love what you said about look forward to something, just plan something and look forward to it and focus on that, and not on how badly you might be feeling in the moment, because you can change that. And when you have something to look forward to, it's just an action that takes your mind off your current state. Justin, you have been an absolutely wonderful guest, and I am so grateful to you, brother. I really am. And how can people reach you? How can they connect with you? Because I know that you coach people and you do a lot for people. You have a great heart. How can people reach you?
Well, first of all, I want to appreciate and recognize you as well. You're an amazing, wonderful human being. And I love you, brother, and I respect you, and I receive you, and I thank you, and I love you. Um, and people can reach me on Instagram. My my handle is at the Justin Bucci.
Mm-hmm.
That's one way to reach me, is at the Justin Bucci on Instagram, or Facebook, which is facebook.com/Bucci.Justin. And my last name is spelled B as in boy, UCCI. So that's one way to reach me, or two ways to reach me, I should say.
Wonderful. What I'm going to do is I'm going to post those in the show notes, those connections, so that people can reach out and actually have a conversation with you or connect with you. And I thank you so much for taking your time and for being vulnerable. And you shared a lot of you were vulnerable today, and you shared a lot of your story with us. And it's a reminder to anyone out there who may be struggling. And I'm talking to you, listeners. If you are struggling with something, and your life has not gone all that greatly, it can change. And Justin here is proof of that, he went from a felony, being told he was worthless, being told he wouldn't amount to anything, working for $15,000 a year, to turning that right around and to being the powerhouse that he is today. So that means that there's hope for each and every one of us. Justin, thank you so much for coming on the show. You've really blessed us today, my friend.
Thank you so much, brother. I love you.
Hey, Justin, I just wanted to follow up with you. Actually, you wanted to follow up with me because there's part of your story that you didn't include in our original broadcast. Would you mind sharing that with us now?
Yeah, of course. Of course. Thank you, Paul. So there is an important piece to this story that I had forgotten to mention, but I had got complete with my stepfather. Before I could move on in my life, I knew that I had to get complete with him. So what I did was I went back with him. I asked him if we can talk, and I remember going outside and saying to him, I know that I may have caused trouble growing up as a kid, and I may have not been, the best in getting into trouble and things, but I just wanted to let you know, I love you, and I know you've done a lot for this family. And I started crying in his arms. I really started crying, and he hugged me, and he told me he loved me. And when he told me he loved me, it made me cry even more. And it just felt like all this weight was lifted off of my shoulder, because as a child, growing up, he was telling me all these things, and now here I am getting complete with it and not letting it hold me back anymore, and him telling me he loves me. And now when I see him, I give him a hug, and it's nice. It's a really nice feeling, and what I learned is that I had to be the one to change, because a lot of the times we wait for other people to change. And sometimes that's not how life works. We have to be the ones to change, to see change. And that's what I wanted to add. So thank you.
I thank you for adding that, because that's a crucial part of the story, the forgiveness, and the fact that not to hold that resentment, because it is a dark emotion, or it's a dark feeling to do that. And so, yeah, you released all that, and look at the two of you now. So sometimes we don't understand why a person is the way that they are without knowing what they've gone through in their background. And when you forgave him, and and that embracing happened, you embraced more than just the fact that you let it go. You embraced the rest of your life, so that was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that, Justin.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks for listening. Tune in next week for another insightful episode. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button and leave your comments. For more information, check out our website at www.inspireus.ca. Remember, it's not what happens to us that matters most. It's how we respond to what happens to us that does. Stay strong and resilient.